The debate of the Gay Australian Marriage Bill in the Australian Parliament this week, especially in the loopy Senate, has just become farcical in many instances and downright offensive, not only to gay and lesbian people but to other sectors of the community as well. Of course, in the lead-up to the debates, you had the dependably idiotic Jim Wallace of the Australian Christian Lobby shoot himself in the foot by opening his big mouth and saying that gay sex was more dangerous than smoking, then attempting to sheet home the blame for his stupidity, or as he put it, his nuanced comments, to gay extremists. Of course, he has now put ASL firmly where it belongs, in the sin bin with most sane thinking people. The equally reliable Anglican Archbishop of Sydney and very unchristian and discriminatory homophobe Dr. Philip Jensen came out on the Q&A television program on ABC and added his meaningless imprimatur to Wallace's comments, and added that gay people live shorter lives than heterosexual people. He of course did not mention he was using subsequently proven to be flawed data to do that. After all, why should he? As he depends on a book which is largely hearsay, has sections that has been proven to be scientifically flawed and incorrect, on which to base his beliefs. Of course, Queensland National Senator Ron Boswell hauled his jumbo-sized frame into the Senate this week to proclaim gay people are not normal, based on his view only, of course. His Queensland Senate colleague and overly ambitious Senator Barnaby Joyce showed just how dangerous it is if he were to achieve his ambitions and become Deputy Prime Minister in any future coalition government, when he told the Senate that if you do not pass on your genetic material, whatever that happens to be, onto your children, it impinges on the relationship you can have with that child. Pardon me. Senator Joyce was of course referring to the fact that if marriage is legalised for gay people, then adoption, IVF and other forms of having a family would also follow suit. What the empty-headed Nong did not take into consideration was that he was also offending all foster parents, adoptive parents and adoptees, as there is no genetic material between them. Shock horror, Senator Joyce, most of them would be heterosexual as well. Should Senator Joyce be successful in succeeding long-time sitting member Bruce Scott in the seat of Maranoa and move to the House of Reps, he would then be in a position to salve his inflated ego and have a shot at Nationals leader Warren Truss and subsequently become Deputy Prime Minister in any future coalition government. That should be sufficient to send any rational person into a state of febrile meltdown. It would also serve the Senator well to know his own state branch of the LNP has endorsed same-sex marriage as its policy, but that probably did not register in the head of the Senator who believes only he is right about anything at any given time. Last night, of course, Senator Cory Bernardi managed to claw his way back from hanging off the right edge of the universe and go into the Senate and unintelligently inform the House that he believed the passing of the legislation was more or less the thin end of the wedge and that bestiality could be next on the legislative agenda. His brainless decoration, nothing unusual from his faction of the Liberal Party, has caused him to subsequently fall on his sword as Parliamentary Secretary to the Leader of the Opposition, Tony Abbott. That outcome was predictable, and he would have been under enormous pressure from the more moderate and intelligent members of the coalition to get on his bike. There is little doubt that if he had not tendered his resignation this morning, he would have faced the public ignominy of having been sacked. Accepted resignations in politics are just mere spin. Abbott now has to come out and declare that Bernardi would not be considered for a ministry or parliamentary secretary role in any future government he leads, as the man is obviously unhinged and not just a little bit. To say he has to serve political penance, as Abbott did today, is somewhat cute, and it also gives me the impression that this prize dunce will be re-inflicted on the electorate in some leading role should the coalition win the next election. Prime Minister Julia Gillard can also not escape from the current debate unscathed. She has been gutless, failed to enforce her party's platform on gay marriage on the floor of the chamber, and generally she has squibbed it. Exactly the same can be said for opposition leader Abbott. In fact, the Liberal Party looks dumb, as when it comes to this issue, they're all over the place. Only yesterday, New South Wales Premier Barry O'Farrell announced that he would allow Coalition MPs a conscience vote on the issue when a multi-party sponsored bill on same-sex marriage is considered on the floor of the New South Wales Parliament. Similar bills are now up for consideration in South Australia and Tasmania, and there is an undertaking from the ACT government to introduce its own legislation should the federal bill be defeated, which is almost certain. Real leaders, John Key, the New Zealand Prime Minister, and David Cameron, the British Prime Minister, have both supported same-sex marriage legislation, and they are conservatives. In fact, Cameron said he supported the legislation not in spite of being conservative, but because he was a conservative. I'm sure the religious nutters on the New South Wales right of the Liberal Party will take time out from trying to assassinate their fellow party members in the left and moderate factions and to try and wrest control of the party, will be screeching similar gibberish to what we have seen from Bernardi, Joyce and Boswell in Canberra when the bill hits the floor of the New South Wales Parliament. Their reliably naive and stupid behaviour may come as a benefit to Alex Greenwich, the convener of the marriage equality movement, if in fact he stands for the seat of Sydney against the Liberal candidate Shane Mallard. A by-election is necessary in this seat to replace Clover Moore, who's been forced from her seat by legislative changes that forbid her from both being Lord Mayor of Sydney and a parliamentarian. Both the ALP and the Coalition have long coveted the inner city seat, and it would be somewhat of an oxymoron if the right of the Liberal Party were to be screaming against marriage equality on one hand, then exhorting the electorate to vote for an openly gay candidate in a seat that has a heavy gay representation and an even larger gay-friendly representation. But to most, this type of idiocy would not be surprising, as the gene pool in Macquarie Street at the moment is extremely thin. One also has to wonder what happened to the middle-of-the-road moderates in the Abbott opposition in Canberra. By and large, they've gone to water, because there's a sniff of a change of government in the air, and their own political ambitions and self-interest has well and truly overtaken their beliefs in what is right and what is wrong. Of course, there were some good contributions to the debate in the Senate, including that of Labor Senator Doug Cameron, who was not only supporting the bill but let it be known what he thought of the current stance of the PM and other members of his party that were against same-sex marriage equality. No one expected the debate to be easy and lovey-dovey, but no one expected it to be so debased that it offended large sections of the community, 67%, according to the Sydney Morning Herald online poll this morning. That's how many people Corey Bernardi got offside with his bestiality comments last night. It was also diminishing in many ways to gay people, and yet another example that rank discrimination is alive and well even within the corridors of Canberra. There is no doubt the federal legislation is dead in the water without conscience votes. But it is also going to look even more laughable and politically gutless for both Abbott and Gillard as individual states introduce their own legislation that will see the great injustice being inflicted in Canberra righted on a state and territory basis.